Hello, thanks for watching. Subscribe down below if you're enjoying. In this video I'm going to take you through how I painted my Delaque gang for Necromunda. Now I'm going for a shadowy, secretive kind of colour scheme. A couple of different things I'm doing here from what I would normally do in terms of the battered leather on the jacket and some really pale skin. Now this was a test model because I was testing those two new things and how I was going to do it. But it got picked up off my Instagram by Games Workshop's Hobby Roundup, and I thought, well, I can't not show people now, can I? The other thing I was testing in this video was the camera angles. So if you prefer the camera angles I'm using in this one, drop me a comment down below. You know, always experimenting, always trying to do different and new things. So how have I done the gang? Started off with black spray, then used a lead belcher over the top, exactly the same as I've done all my Necromunda, because I want to try and tie the entire collection together so it has some similar tones and some similar paint usage, even on a completely different gang. So that's how I've started. Now we're going with a dark brown onto his jacket, because I, again, want to keep all these colours quite muted as we're going through to add to that secretive, stealthy effect. So I'll put all the paint descriptions down below so you can follow it exactly if you want, or just take some inspiration if you want to do that. Now when we're painting this dark brown onto his jacket, making real care not to hit the piping that goes around the jacket and up towards the straps, and also the armour panels that these guys have got on them, trying to stay clear of that because we've used that silver spray colour and we want to try and keep it clean everywhere so that we're not wasting the time going back over and touching that, because it's a massive time saver using the silver, so try and keep it clean. Following on from the dark brown onto the jacket, we're taking a slightly lighter brown to do what are the leather straps and things that hold the jacket closed, and on the belt and everything. You could do the whole thing in the initial brown and then use your highlighting layers to sort of bring that up, but I find using a next colour up onto the leather straps adds a bit of difference into the model, so it shows you're putting some effort in, but it's still quite muted and still quite close to that original brown, so you can almost imagine this guy falling back into the shadows because all these colours are quite tonally similar. So all your straps, all your pouches, that kind of stuff, as you do with the dark brown. So I spoke about tying gangs together quite often, or tying armies together with the colour schemes you use. And this is a perfect example in this gang for it, because every model is painted principally identically. Normally when I paint models, I show you all the different models and I'll paint, one colour on one model, move on to the next, so you can see how I'm building it across the gang. This one's interesting, so I'm showing you the tester model, mostly because it got picked up on Instagram. But also the gang is done fairly identically through the whole thing. So next, moving on to brass colours using the Retributive armour, and this is really to pick out some interesting details from the metal we've just done. I want to keep it muted, but I also want to put a little bit of visual interest in. So what I do is I'll pick out all the belt buckles, pick out the gang signs, whatever they are on the stomach, and bits of the rebreather, both in the mask side and in the section around the back that they all wear. So again, consistent where we're putting it on each model, add a bit of visual difference, but also keep the colours fairly down and muted. Now on to the flesh. Now this is the one of the big points of difference that we're going to try and go for with the Delaque, because I want it to be a real pale skin colour, as though they don't see the outdoors. Well, most of the Necromundas don't, but these ones clearly don't go in front of the UV lamps to keep the tans up. So we're using a real pale flesh colour here, so one without any pink or red tones in there, because we want to go and take it down a layer and go really pale. So whatever flesh colour you use is fine, but try to avoid the more vibrant pinky flesh colours, because we're going to try and keep this very pale when we get to it. Again, try and be as neat as you possibly can, thin coats on the flesh and everything. If you miss a couple of bits, it doesn't matter, because what we're going to do later, we will be able to sort of rectify that. But as with all the painting, when you're doing this, the neater and tidier you can be, the better at this stage. And I'm using a much thinner brush than I would normally use to do the flesh, because in the faces and around the skin areas of these Delaques, there's a lot of bits you want to keep the metallic showing, around the eyes, and again around the ears, and there's bits of machinery built into the heads and things. So try and be as careful as you humanly possible so that you don't have to do too much fixing. Now gun casings, if you watch my previous videos, I do tend to paint gun casings in a different colour. So with the Escherides last week, I did a bright vibrant green to tie into their gang. With these guys, again, muted scheme, so I'm going with black. So black gun casings, it shows you put some effort into the model. You've not just left it all bare silver, but it again keeps that low down tones that we're going for. I've also picked out the handles of the knives that this particular model's wearing, and I've done similar things on the others if they've got knives or different packs on that we want to use. So keeping all the visual tones quite muted. So I'm picking up some green now. Now you wouldn't have to do this side, but I wanted to make the canister that goes into his breathing device at the back look as though it's separate. Just to put one little additional colour, so I suppose green you could say is the gang colour, so to speak. And I've taken a dark green onto there, but I've also used that dark green onto the artificial eyes that all the Delaques have implanted. You could, if you want, do a yellow or a red or whatever in these eyes. I've seen people do that, but for me, if you're a secretive, stealthy gang that is all into your spying and all that kind of stuff, you wouldn't go around having bright red, glowy eyes, in my opinion. So I've used that same green onto the bionic eyes because you can see it. You can see there's something different, but it follows the same kind of side of the colour wheel in terms of everything's quite dark and muted down. So that is all the base coats laid down. Now I'm going through to an ink wash stage. And the first wash you'll be using is one you'll see me using a lot if you follow the channel. It's a Vallejo sepia wash. It adds a dirty, gritty, grimy effect, which, over entire models actually looks really nice as well if that's what you're going for. But with him, we're not going for that. We're not going for the dirty effect. What we're going for is a darkened, stealthy effect. But I'm still using this on the base because, again, like I said before, all my Necromunda models have the same bases. So this will tie it together the whole collection. And the wash we're using on the model is nuln oil, which we traditionally use for, painting metallics and guns and that kind of stuff. But I'm using it across the flesh and everything as well, because what it'll do is it'll darken down the metal, darken down his clothing, but also darken down his skin. As you can see here, I've just shown you as it's beginning to dry. You can just see the amount that I've kind of put on and the effect it's having across there, so you can get a gauge of the thickness you might want to put on. Now I'm going to start working on the detail. So what I traditionally do is I will then take the same colours we've already used and just do a highlight layer. But I want to do something a little bit different on the leather jacket that they're wearing. So I've taken, see here, a very old brush. It's a starter brush that I've cut the end off to give an almost flat, stubby brush effect. What I'm doing now is stippling on the colour that we've already used. So rather than painting it across and doing a highlight layer, it's a little bit of paint on the end of the brush, clean it off onto some paper if you've got too much on, and you are literally now stabbing onto those raised areas, and it'll deposit a few specks of the paint. You'll see bits of the original colour coming through, and then little dots where you're putting on what is now like a highlight layer. And what the stippling effect does is it builds a bit of texture on those raised areas, gives it a slightly different effect, but then when we do the next bit we're putting on top after, it really gives a nice kind of worn, battered effect rather than clean, crisp cloth, which you would get if you were doing just a traditional, edge highlight. So definitely a technique is worth doing, and you'll see we're going to finish it off in a minute, but we're just going to work now on the colours we've already used. So now we are literally going through, running through in order the colours that we've already put down on this model. So the leather strap on there, there'll be 2 or 3 colours sort of showing through already, because you'll have the nuln oil stage right in the cracks and crevices where it's pure nuln oil, and then as it pulls out from the cracks and crevices, it'll lighten up until you get to the highlight area. Then if you go over with that leather colour on there, it puts the final highlight, and you're aiming for probably between 1/3 to 1/2 of the strap being covered by this lighter colour, so that you can then see all the blending through of all different colours that have already been used. So just quick and simple. If you wanted to, you could then get the next colour of brown up from there, or mixing a bit of white into the brown or something like that and bring it up. But for me, just that one extra coverage gives a really nice effect. And the same with the metal, you can see there, just kind of covering, 1/3 to 1/2 of what's there already on the raised areas fairly quickly, but just to give that highlight and that visual interest on there. And it really does look like you've put far more effort in than you have, because the nuln oils and the washes do a bit of work for you. Now look, is it going to be as good as doing 5 or 6 layers? No, probably not, but on a wargaming model and you're gaming with it, you're not really going to notice. So you do the same thing with the blacks on the guns. Sounds a bit strange because obviously you can't shade black, but when you put the nuln oil on, it's not just black. So you put the black back on, it does give that effect. Now the skin, and this is the biggest visual difference that you are going to find after we've after the robe we're wearing. So you see there, just banging the green on, and then work on the skin. So what I'm doing now, you don't see me mix it on the palette, but I will put a off-white down onto the wet palette, and then mix in 50-50 the off-white and the pale flesh that we're using to start doing highlight effects. But before we do that, the first thing we're doing is going back with that pale flesh colour. Now this is quite watered down now, that's something to be aware of. It's been on the wet palette for a few hours at this point, so it is quite watered down. And you can see I never use the brush in the centre of the paint, I'm just taking it from the edges. So when I'm doing this, very, very small amounts of paint are actually going down onto this model. You don't want to put thick layers, you keep it thin, keep it very quite watered and build it up very, very gradually. And all I'm aiming for is the raised areas, so the nose, the brow ridge, the top of the head, and building up slowly onto the cheekbones, the ears and whatever, and go very, very carefully, very, very gently. The slower you go, the easier it is to correct it. And you can, if you make mistakes, and I did make mistakes on these. This was a test model, it went really well, but when I did the final gang and I rolled it out to everybody, I made a right mess of the leader's face, and had to basically reverse my steps and almost go back to the previous colours to sort of correct it, and it still ended up not quite as good as the others. But go slowly, go carefully, you can almost reverse what you've done, and it's important to experiment and play, and you'll get better at it gradually as you go through. So you'll see here the amount of time that I'm actually spending on this layer, going really, really slowly, building it up even before I've put the extra colours on and started the blend process. So now you see what I talked about before. You'll see the 3 sort of flesh colours on there, although the right ones are pure white, and then I'll start to play with that. But what I've done now is taken some red and I'm dropping this into the injuries across his face, because obviously he's got these bionic eyes into his face, probably a bit sore, a bit rough, and quite a lot of these models have got scars around their eyes and around their faces, and just dropping a bit of red in there to show that they're really not healthy. It's not exactly like it's healed and this is a perfect bionic that has gone in. I think makes a real nice effect on the face. And then when you get down to the almost off-white colour that we're going to do the flesh, it stands out really nicely, and I think it's a good visual. So keep playing, keep putting small layers on. We're using a 50-50 mix here, and then using very, very little of the pure off-white colour onto them on the really raised areas. And that's what I'd say, keep going until you think, I'm comfortable with what this looks like. Yeah, keep building up in very, very thin layers. Stay away from the shadowed areas. Just focus on the raised bone areas, and you'll get there, and you'll have an effect that hopefully you'll like the look of when you're done. So now to finish off the battered leather effect. So we've already done the stippling. What I've done now and there, you can see I've taken some of that off-white, put it in with the brown, probably about 1/3 of the off-white into 2/3 of the brown. And now I'm taking a very fine brush and I'm lining across the raised area. So normally if you're doing a highlight, you would go along the raised area, but I'm not here. What I'm doing is I'm taking very small amounts of that paint and drawing very small lines very close to each other across the raised area. So that will build on top of the stippling layer. So you've stippled around these areas already, and that's given some broken details and it's a little battered, and you line across it, and it just adds another layer of wear and tear to that jacket as you go across. So something different to what you normally do. If you normally do a straight line right the way along the highlight, makes it crisp and clean, we're going for it looking old and battered. And I think it's quite simple and quick to do, but gives a real nice, for me, effect. So only thing you would want to get after now, this is just tidying up. So I've taken some metal colour and I'm just going along where I think could do with a little bit of extra pop on some of the metal, or tidying it up where we've perhaps drifted onto some brown or whatever. But I've kept it fairly clean as I'm going, so the tidy up stage didn't take that long, and the cleaner you make it through the paint process, the easier for you it is. A little bit of dry brushing onto the base here just to bring the base up a little, and that's the completed model to what I did for the rest of the gang. So points of difference: the battered leather, the pale flesh, the nuln oil across the model as a different wash for me. That's what we did different, that was what I was experimenting. What you're seeing here is the bit that I wasn't happy with on this tester model, hence why I wouldn't normally show the tester model. So I've taken some Druki Violet to put onto the barrels to try and make a sort of blued, heat damaged effect on the gun. It looks okay, but I wasn't overly happy with it, so I didn't roll that out to the rest of the gang. But it's important to see. But there's the model that was picked on the Hobby Roundup. They said some real nice things about it. I was obviously really happy, even though it was a test. There's the rest of the gang. Really enjoyed this one. I think it looked really effective. Hope you enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.